Talk about how a seemingly simple request can actually be a big deal.
Okay, so a simple pricing request, warranties. So again, I'll use my example to negotiate a contract. A super expensive, highly technical part. Drawings are going to come from engineering company. They're passed through to, I'm on the procurement side, into the procurement, and now we're going to go out to contract manufacturing to get it done. How do we do a warranty situation? Well, unfortunately, that's a simple request, is manufacture this thing. This engineering company over here is going to give us the drawing for it. Because one of the industries I work in has a lot of old technology. It's a utility, so there are a lot of old generators, and so we need this one little part.
They're custom made, special one-off, and if it breaks, there's an outage for a long time.
Correct, yeah. Right. So we've got a lot of issues where that warranty is incredibly important. If it's not properly built into the bid package, this is what we're going to do. Then you've got a simple request. Can you manufacture this part? Oh, this part's going to cost $5 million because it's going to be custom manufactured. Where are we getting the drawings? Oh, well, we're getting it from third-party engineering company over here. Well, now what we have is a chain of custody issue. We've got drawings here, and the contract manufacturer and the engineers have no contractual relationship. And we've got the customer in the middle trying to manage this relationship. So that actually created a situation that now we as contract professionals have to try to figure out how to solve. Do we solve it in the warranty section? So we went and we rewrote the warranty section because it looked like a simple request. We're not going to warranty this because we don't have anything to do with the drawings, and our engineers have no way to communicate changes other than back through your company. So if you don't accept our changes and we manufacture it and it doesn't fit, bad on you. We're not going to warranty that. Except that the legal department, for very good reason, said, we're never going to accept that. We're not going to accept the risk that the part doesn't work. So it really set the whole conversation back on its heels, because you really have to sort of sort through, well, then who's going to own the risk? Are you going to put it back on the engineering company? Well, that contract's long been written and is under an MSA, and it doesn't cover the kind of risk that we're talking about over here, because this is a very large part that wasn't necessarily anticipated in the boilerplate language. That's for the common denominator. So this is a situation where the price did not reflect the risk that we were asking the contract manufacturer to accept, and language that we were trying to put in place to solve it really exposed my client significantly. And I understood that somebody needed to take that risk profile on. And ultimately, the legal department said, no, we're not willing to take that risk profile on, which then led to a whole other round of negotiations. And it ultimately impacts the price because somebody has to take on that risk.
Well, it affects the operations as well, because somehow you need to have the engineer and the manufacturer talking to each other, either through the client or some other way. But, you know, I've been involved in many designs of various products, and they iterate. I mean, it's not one and done almost ever. So, you know, that can become a real challenge, and you need to think about that whole supplier ecosystem and how they play together, or if they play together when you're crafting your sourcing strategy in the first place. So if you have that good strategy up front, then when it gets to the contract professionals, we just make it happen. Not so bad. If it doesn't exist, then it's to me, it's our job to go back and go, hey guys, you need to talk to you, and you need to talk to you, because this isn't going to work.
Right. But interesting, right? So they're a coaching client of mine. So I asked the contract professional, well, what does the contract with the engineering firm have in place? Like, let's pull it out and let's figure it out. And that person hadn't done it. So as a practice tip, right? Because we're teaching people who are new to this. Well, Lawrence, I didn't write that contract with engineering. You know, Sally Sue did. That's, you know, she does the engineering contracts for this really big company. I do the contract manufacturing contracts. So we really have to break down these silos. Right. Just because Sally Sue is the one who negotiated the engineering contract to do all the engineering work doesn't mean I don't go into the system and pull that contract when I'm trying to figure out what the exposure is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're representing the company, and kind of the snarky way I've done that in the past is most employee badges have the name of the company on top. Go, what does it say on top of your badge? Oh, name of company. Well, okay. It says name of company, right? Not name of group. You guys go talk to each other. right?
That's true.
And yeah, I mean, that's kind of a harsh way to do it, but sometimes people forget y'all working for the same company. The least you can do is be on the same page, because your suppliers aren't going to be on the same page as you are.
If
So,
you're not
you
on
know,
the same page,
yeah.
you can guarantee these two suppliers are not going to be on the
Exactly,
same page. And then
right.
you've got this butting heads again. It's not my
Right.
fault it was manufactured poorly. It's not my fault
Yeah.
that the drawings were incomplete. We tried to tell you the drawings were incomplete, but we didn't have a process in the contract to notify you that the drawings were incomplete. We have no voice at the table, right? Because the contract was a design engineer contract that
Yeah.
said,
And
we're going to give you the drawings.
that's the sub-optimized, it's the split
Right.
sub-optimized approach. And it's really dysfunctional. It doesn't
Yeah.
work. And the funny thing is, little companies, startups almost never have that problem. It's big companies that have that problem.
Big companies. have
Because
that problem.
big companies put together this administrative, set of bureaucracy, for lack of a better term. And there's some goodness about bureaucracy, but there's some badness too. And the badness is, this is my RA and I stay in my box, and this is mine, I stay in my box, but nobody's got a job of lining all the boxes up, right?
Yes.
Well, I see that as our job. If we're going to go create a contract
Yes.
and it's going to be functional for a long period of time, if nobody else's job is to line those boxes up, we got to do it.
What does negotiating a win-win price in a complex relationship really look like?
Yeah. It depends. The thing about win-win, right? Win-win means there's something in it for both parties, and they're at it. Instead of fighting over the side, or fighting over a slice of the pie, you're trying to grow the pie.
Absolutely.
And there's so many variations of what win-win could mean. An example: let's pretend you're trying to outsource something, and the idea is you need innovation, right? Real innovation, right? Solving an unmet business need. Maybe your normal policy is that when IP is created under an agreement with a supplier, you get to keep it. That's fairly common if you're the buyer, right? Well, maybe a win-win is something as simple as, you know what, we get rights to whatever this new thing is you've created for the first year, and then you can sell it to the rest of the marketplace and make money on it. So we basically paid for your R&D. We get ahead of our competitors, but because we allow you to own it and license and sell it later, and maybe we get a perpetual license for brother-in-law discount or something. Because we allow you to do that, we can get it at a much better price, right? So it's creativity, right? A real win-win in a situation like that could be almost anything, but it gets to understanding what are your business imperatives and what is the supplier's business imperative.
That's exactly what I was going to focus on. So I've got an example in terms of warehousing space, right? So brand name company wanted their logistics provider to dominate this entire warehousing space, but it was cost prohibitive, right? So they also want a really low cost. And the logistics provider said, well, if there's a way that we can wall off part of it, Chinese wall, different people, everything that we need so that your products and your warehousing is very different from what we're doing over here, then we can give you a more cost competitive price. The thing of it is it sounds simple, but if you're dealing with technology that is protected and you don't want others in the market to know what you're doing, then you've got to be really careful about it. Or if it's got to be secured for some reason, and this needed to be secured for many regulatory reasons. So that's a complicated conversation, but you have to understand the supplier's drivers, their cost drivers, their risk drivers, in order to then get to that win-win. If all you're focusing on is your own drivers, if you're the customer, then you're not going to understand how to get to the win-win. You've got to create the space to understand what the market drivers and cost drivers are to the suppliers.
Right. And with a mature buyer and seller, the RFS process really facilitates that.
Yes.
It's much more open book, and it's a lot easier to craft a solution that allows the supplier's profit margin, hits your TCO, and so on and so forth. Not everybody can do that.
Words. What do you suggest when an organization cannot make trade-offs?
So it's weird to do negotiation where you can't make trade-offs, right? So that means there's some kind of policy reason, or there's some kind of misunderstanding or whatever. Sometimes it's regulatory, absolutely. And so when you're being handcuffed, because normally you think about any negotiation, it's give and take. if you can't do trade-offs, it's absolutely critical up front that you know that going in. And in fact, I would actually strongly recommend letting the bidders know, right? Because, typically when we're going to solicit an RFP, we're going to say, success of this is, blah, blah, blah. And we're going to be looking at things like your overall total cost of ownership. We're going to be looking at your quality. We're going to be whatever it is, right? And they'll be in order. We're not going to say how much each one's worth, but it'll be in some kind of ranked order so they can get a little bit of steer the witness, right? An acceptable good proposal is going to be kind of focused on these things, but also cover this other stuff. If you can at least put guide rails in the solicitation package, then when you can't do trade-offs, at least the bidders are closer to something that's meaningful and it makes sense. Because the worst thing you're going to have is these guys have this one thing that's awesome. These other guys have this other 3 or 4 things that are great. I really want to smush you all together and have that, but I can't ask for that. Right? So, what I want to be able to do is have the best possible outcome. And if I can't do trade-offs, if I set the, almost call it stacking the deck, right? If I stack the deck ahead of time, I have a better chance of getting the cards I need. And I don't mean that in an unethical way. I mean that in a set it up for success way.
Okay.
Like a magic trick with cards as opposed to, the stuff that gets you thrown out of Vegas.
Okay. So let me give you an example that I heard. So I recently talked to a very large company that's headquartered here in the United States, but now needs to implement GDPR. Mm-hmm. And the woman said to me, I know that this is going to reverberate through some of our smaller suppliers. And I know that some of our engineers have very close relationships with their suppliers, but their systems aren't going to meet our requirement, and that's just a non-negotiable. So my point was, well, it's a non-negotiable this way. Super small supplier and really large company that has GDPR requirements that your data cannot have, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
However, this company can then subcontract to this company that then does, in fact, have those things in place.
Yeah.
That then now becomes the working relationship with this very large company. I think that that's ways in which I can honor that these GDPR requirements that this company is saying are non-negotiable. No, we're not going to give you a pass, super small supplier.
Yep.
Just because superstar engineer Jeanette seems to love you and work with you doesn't mean that Jeanette, gets the right to say, no, you don't have to honor the GDPR requirements. Right. There's a workaround. But that requirement, to your point, that's not something that this company can, for a lot of very good reasons, regulatory reasons, make any exceptions for.
Sure.
What I'd like to encourage contract professionals is to go off the record and say, how do we solve that problem? We can't ask you to meet it. We can't say no, that you've got an exception to this. But there's got to be a workaround somewhere else in the mix.
Well, it's creative problem solving. I mean, another way to do the same kind of thing is store your data in, Google or Azure or AWS. Well, let's face it, we'll pick on Amazon. If AWS isn't GDPR compliant, how much damage is that going to do to Amazon? Right? They've got the resources to get it right. So I would have more faith of storing my data in their cloud than I would in my own homegrown, cobbled together data center if I'm a small company. So sometimes you can do things like that as well. You don't even need to have a new contractual relationship. You just have to change the way you do your stuff. Right? So
if they can afford to do it that way.
Sure. A lot of creative problem solving is the point. And and everything's trade-offs, but it's not, technically a trade-off, right? Because we're trying to figure out how can we accommodate this deal killer and be creative about it. It's like, I can't let you off the hook.
Right.
But there's a lot of ways you can be on the hook, right? And some of which you can afford, some of which you can't.
Correct. Excellent.
This is also for both of you. Can you please talk about how terms affect the cost of goods and services?
That could be a really long answer. Let's just try to hit the highlights. You want to go first?
Sure, I'll hit the highlights. So in the manual, there's a chart where you've got your calculable risks that we know are going to happen, and they're added into the baseline prices the supplier gives to us. Things like warranties, things like cost of financing, things like administrative tools, the cost to have someone dedicated 10 hours a month to do everything through your portal. Then you've got the unknown, but we have to guesstimate calculable risks, right? Which is what happens if our intellectual property is breached? What happens if we have a warranty claim or something like that, right? And so the goal is to keep in mind, going back to the warranty on the contract manufacturer and price, is to understand that if we're going to go outside the bounds of what's normally done, it's got to be a risk that can somehow be calculable, either as a known risk or as an unknown risk. And what I love about the chart that was done by an attorney many, many years ago is that the last category, number 8, is et cetera. And that's the part where you have to put your thumb on the scale and go, I don't know, so I'm going to add the risk premium to cover whatever we couldn't have anticipated. The best way to control price with terms is to anticipate as many risk events as you possibly can and make them as calculable as you possibly can. Control them with the party who can best control them so that when somebody else goes through and starts to put the risk premiums in, they're reduced and manageable, ideally so that the supplier still has profit, but we're still coming in under the baseline cost of the customer in a make-buy decision.
Right. And I'll add that in addition to that, competitive environment obviously helps, but there are some risks you're just never going to know. Tariffs is an example.
Okay.
Somebody has a revolution and takes over in, civil unrest kind of situation. The whole earthquake, tornado, hurricane, whatever. Right? There's things that, yes, they're going to happen. Can't really predict it.
Right.
So some of these things we kind of choose to just put blinders on and go, you know what? I'm just not going to worry about that. But that should be a conscious decision, right? I know there's going to be an earthquake in Puget Sound, and it could be somewhere in the 9 to 10 on the Richter scale. That's going to be a really big freaking deal, right? I have earthquake insurance.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ignore it. I have insurance, but you know what? Other than that, I'm not going to go move to another place because of that. We all know it's coming someday, But
so a prudent company would understand and factor that in.
Right, exactly. So earthquake insurance might be a reasonable thing to factor in the price. Picking up and moving your operations to some other place may not be.
So let me give you an example on fuel. So a few years back, there was that huge spike in fuel. And so a lot of the third-party logistics companies really got hit hard.
Yes.
Now, in a fixed price environment, that's a price associated with terms where somebody's going to end up upside down.
Yes.
Either the supplier's going to end up upside down, and some of them ended up being damaged financially because there was no fuel surcharge ability within the fixed price agreement, or the converse, which is customers that didn't risk premium that into their own and have a contingency fund, then got the risk fuel surcharges because they were permissible under the contract and they didn't have the contingency fund. Now, we know that that fuel is volatile as a risk. So now that's a risk that the parties need to negotiate to figure out how do we best deal with a volatile element such as fuel in a volatile environment, shipping, as opposed to the earthquake, which may or may not happen, right?
Yes. Well, it's going to, but we don't know when. It could be, tomorrow, or it could be 10,000 years from now. So, the fuel is a better example of things that we know happen. It's always doing this,
That's right.
And you can hedge, obviously, against it. But sometimes that drives a pricing structure. Sometimes you're going to say, I'm going to pay you a certain fixed fee, but if fuel goes above a certain banded range, and you can predict what that range should be, then we're going to talk about the premium, right? So if it's within a certain range, you just eat it. If it's beyond that range, okay,
And it's not just that you eat it. So what you're talking about is bands, and I love bands, because if it goes below the band, then the supplier has to give it back to the customer. And if it goes above the band, then the customer has to pay it to the supplier. But if it's moving around in the band,
nothing changes.
That's right. That's a great way to control risk, where it's allocated to the appropriate party.
Yeah.
We always think about something going above the band, but rarely do we ever hold suppliers accountable for what goes beneath the band.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you want that, most likely scenario with upper and lower control limits. Absolutely. And you calculate it, based on historical data or whatever appropriate methodology makes sense given your circumstance.